Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today we are continuing our conversation about Strongholds. We're going to be discussing Warlocks. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are continuing our conversation today around Strongholds, how you're going to build them for the PC, the NPC, and then, of course, antagonist Strongholds when you're trying to push through those. Today we're going to be looking at Warlocks, and then next week we're going to be talking about Wizards. John, why don't you start off our conversation about Warlocks? How do we dive into this particular class?
I think that so Warlocks is one that I get a bunch of players who want to play Warlocks in my games, even though it's not a class that I tend to play a lot. But the neat thing about Warlocks is that they kind of have a lot of their a lot of things are baked into the class in terms of like interactions and story that you don't get from a bunch of other classes. So you have the Patron, right? And the Patron gives this avenue to make the Warlock unique in a way that I think that sometimes is lacking in other classes that have a similar entity. So a cleric with a deity, there should be kind of a similar relationship where you get that feeling, and sometimes I feel like that kind of gets pushed to the wayside and go, I'm a life cleric, I do healing, whereas the Warlock has that more intimate relationship with the Patron. But the really cool thing about it is the Patron provides so many avenues, the type of Patron provides so many avenues for the way that the Warlock can come together, that you pretty much have the whole gamut of Strongholds when it comes to finally getting that in place. If you're looking at just your typical fiendish Warlock, you may just be going with an arcane stronghold of some kind. If you're looking at a Pact of the Blade or a Hexblade, maybe you're looking at a military stronghold. If you're looking at an Archfey, you might be looking at a Grove or some kind of religious stronghold. Or if you're looking at a Celestial Pact, then you may have a religious stronghold. So you really kind of have any option depending on what their archetype is, which I think is really, really cool just in terms of making... You could have an entire party of Warlocks, and I think all of their strongholds would feel very unique and very different.
Yeah, I know that we've looked at several classes over the course of this series, and many of them have had this versatile type of play into it. And I agree with you. Warlocks fall within that category too, that depending on the particular entity that they are paying homage to is going to probably determine what type of stronghold they are getting. And I imagine that this stronghold is something that they could receive directly from that entity in some direction. When I think of clerics and them having a god they pray to and derive their power from, I very rarely see those gods play a role directly in the clerics' lives. But when I'm thinking about a warlock that has an archfey or what have you that they are paying homage to, it's almost like they can come and poof out from whatever dimension they come from and literally gift or grant their subject a stronghold that they're going to then be in charge of managing over or controlling in some way.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting actually to unpack that just a little bit, because like you said, it could be something where there's that very direct, intimate connection, but then you have something like the Great Old One, and it's like Cthulhu is not... the Warlock is tapping into his power in some way, but it's so far beneath his notice that he doesn't know, he doesn't care. It's just that the Warlock happens to be doing something that Cthulhu is not against, and so he allows him to continue to tap into that source of power, which is completely different than a very close and unique relationship with a different type of entity that has more of a one-on-one type relationship with them. So you could have that where it's like, hey, yeah, go ahead. I want you to create this stronghold, or I'm going to help you to create this stronghold because that is a testament to my power. Or it can be something closer to the lines of, If you're going more of the evil route, if you've got a fiendish warlock, or again, you could do this with almost any of them except for maybe a couple that don't make a whole lot of sense. But a fiendish warlock, a pact of the blade, a great old one, a lot of those might have a more evil bent. In which case, you have closer to the religious style stronghold, where it's like, you're my champion now, and you need to go claim this stronghold from this other person because they're either weak or they're not doing my will or something like that. And so you can claim it and you can become my champion, and you remain in that stronghold so long as you continue to do things in my name. Which you could do, I guess, from the good side as well. It just would have a little bit of a different feel to it.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And to be honest, I don't play a lot of Warlocks. And honestly, I've had members in a party play Warlocks before, but it's been very rare that we've gotten to a place where we're building a stronghold.
Right.
With a warlock character. But in my musings, I would imagine that most warlocks are going to be getting that stronghold as a PC from whoever their deity is, or maybe they have like a noble path, so they're inheriting a stronghold maybe from their father or grandfather, and then they are going and they're changing that stronghold to fit this representation of whatever their power is being derived from. So they're having their summoning halls and having their what's what I'm looking for. I want to say alchemy, but essentially they're places to disenchant and enchant and mess with alchemy and summon creatures. And so they're utilizing like this facility to then structure and rebuild and recraft into a representation of their particular type of power and whatever entity they worship.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what you would find in a religious stronghold. They're trying to... And it depends on the goals of the patron, too, which I think is an important aspect. So you might have a patron that is trying to spread their name, who wants the world to be aware of them because they're a powerful entity, but they're not quite a god or a deity of any kind. And so they're trying to achieve godhood, and their warlock... The warlock that is paying them homage and tapping into their power is trying to spread their name so that they become well-known or renowned enough that they can petition for godhood, depending on how that looks in your setting. So that's a possibility. But it may also be a creature, again, like Cthulhu, this great old one, who has no interest whatsoever. Mm-hmm. He is already beyond... He already has the power that he needs and he seeks. What he's interested in is some kind of destruction. So, it's like you continue to create an avenue for my pathway to return to this world so that I can destroy it. Or I can wipe out, whatever it is that they're wanting to wipe out. So, the warlock may actually be playing like two sides of the same coin in that sense, where it's like I need to pay enough homage to my patron to get their power, but I also don't want them to destroy the world. Because that's not my goal. So it's kind of like taking baby steps, but never going quite far enough to allow them to enter in. So playing that kind of game. But
the interesting thing with the warlock that comes to mind, though, is because with every other, I feel like, class that we've spoken about, it's really been sitting down and having a conversation with your player about what their character's motivations are and what they want to accomplish and how they want to structure the stronghold they have. And this one really does play pretty heavily into what the patron or the entity wants. Right. The structure of the stronghold, what's going into it, has to represent those desires, those motivations of the patron themselves, or the warlock may be punished and have power stripped from them. I mean, I played an Avenger once in your party and I upset my god and my powers were stripped. It comes to the place that's like, if you don't have this domicile that's like reflective of who I am and it is spreading my name and showing my power, then I'm going to take your powers away. And so I think there's a little bit of a tug and pull here in terms of developing the stronghold to hopefully align some with what the player character wants to do, but it also has to match what the patron wants to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like you said, that provides for a lot more versatility, but it also provides for a lot more limitation in a lot of ways, that if you go too far outside the bounds of what the patron is willing to accommodate, the patron doesn't have to grant you their power. You have to stay aligned with whatever it is that their goals or their needs are. We've talked quite a bit, I think, about acquiring the stronghold, so I'd like to talk some here about what an NPC warlock looks like if you meet them in their stronghold. which I think we can just reflect back here on the first little bit of the video, where it's like it depends on the archetype, who the patron is, what the warlock is connected to them, or what pact that NPC is affiliated with, so that if you come across a Celestial Pack warlock and you go into their church to their patron, it's not quite a deity, but they're in that process where they've created shrines, or they've created other type of institutions that are geared around the worship and the regard of this patron. And I think that you can almost look at this in the same way, where the warlock, you have to develop the patron as an NPC, so that the patron has goals. And then the warlock who is following that patron is an extension of that patron's will. So, if you have a celestial warlock who is trying to achieve godhood for his patron, the party coming in is likely going to be doing tasks that are affiliated with that goal, because that is the warlock's goal and that is the patron's goal. So starting back from the process of the patron is an NPC, what are their goals, what it is that they want in the world, and then filtering that through the warlock and then into the adventuring party is a good way to try and develop quest lines that are associated with that process.
I like that you keep bringing it back to this celestial warlock, because I think that it gives this sense that you're able to present a stronghold in terms of ambience and atmosphere, where it almost reflects that of a cleric, and it's almost indistinguishable sometimes when you walk into it, that it's a warlock stronghold, which is very interesting to me, because when I think of warlock, I usually go like the macabre route, where it's like more like almost like a vampire stronghold. I feel like I'd be walking into a place that's very
the
gothic
pact of
art.
the undead.
Yeah, like gothic, art and statues and this dark atmosphere, and it's like it feels like almost like you walk into it and you have a bad taste in your mouth, and I would just kind of have that sense of, looming evil and doom when I walk into it. But you keep presenting this celestial idea, and I was like, that'd be very interesting that you walk in and it's the celestial atmosphere and these, sunlit roofs coming in and light shining down and, angelic statues and all these types of things, and you feel like you're in this like divine, like clerical like type of stronghold, and it's actually a warlock that's behind the entire thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the reason I look at that is because I feel like it's a very accessible way of approaching a warlock as an NPC quest giver. You can do the same thing with Archfey. I think that they're approachable in that regard. It's when you get into the strange stuff that it becomes more difficult. Undead Pact, Great Old One pacts, Fiend pacts. So in many of those, I think that it's much easier from the GM perspective to treat them as a hostile entity rather than a quest-giving entity. So you're most likely going in there to remove them or wipe them out. But like you said, it could be something along the same lines where you go in and you are under the impression that they're good or they're wanting something better. Particularly, I think, with the Great Old One entity, that the requests that they're asking for are just strange. It's not good or evil, it's just weird. It's like, I need you to go bring me the shoes of every, third house in the village. And it's like, I don't know why, but okay, I'll go do that. That's not a big deal. And you said you're paying me how much money? Cool. All right. Yeah, let's do it. So there's strange requests from this strange entity or this strange guy who has like this really cool house or tower or whatever it is. There is that approachability there, but I think that oftentimes that kind of has one specific conclusion at a certain point. But it also depends on the warlock, right? As a PC player, if the PC warlock, maybe they and the NPC warlock are both patrons of the same, or both giving patronage to the same patron. So they're both after the same thing, and so maybe it's kind of like that. I need to get approval from this other warlock who is higher up in the pecking order with the patron than I am, so that I can get approval, so I can get my own stronghold, and I do that by performing quests for this warlock.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of specifics, but the quests, I think, are going to be just as versatile as the Stronghold itself when you're looking at it. And it goes back to what you were saying. You have to just go back to the initial motivations of the patron to determine what those are going to be and then build quest lines around those. I don't know that I have anything specifically in terms of what to look for in a PC Stronghold outside of what you've shared.
Yeah, the cool thing is that we're kind of getting towards the end of this series, but many of the other things that we've talked about for other classes apply to the Warlock, just in terms of how does a military stronghold look like, or what does that look like? Well, let's talk about fighters. What does the arcane stronghold look like? Well, let's talk about sorcerers in one regard. We're going to be talking about wizards next week. Those are both going to be applicable. What does a religious stronghold look like? Let's go look at clerics and paladins, and so on and so forth. Like, the Warlock is so versatile that you can kind of pick up from any other class and then put that into place as a good way. And the same thing applies for questing for them, because what it is that they seek to achieve is usually aligned with the patron. So a lot of times that's a religious type entity. But in terms of acquiring the actual stronghold, unlike something like the cleric stronghold, where you may have to petition the overall church in order to found a stronghold, like we've talked about, the patron is the one who wants to grant that. The only problem that the Warlock might run into is trying to found a larger structure on the king's land, for instance, who is not necessarily interested in allowing a new church to pop up, or a new keep, or a new whatever to pop up. And so you'll have to get creative with the means that the Warlock is using in order to be able to get permission to establish a stronghold, probably in the same way as you would any other class. How are they getting permission to do this?
Oh man, I just had a whole series run through my head of running a medieval campaign where you have to do that and be the vassalage and lieges of whatever a king and get your own strongholds. That's what we're doing next, John.
Good. I'm glad. That's what I want to do.
All right, let's talk about the
antagonist.
The antagonist, Stronghold. So stepping into the antagonist Stronghold, I think it has a lot to do with atmosphere. Again, it's going to have a lot to do with the Patron in terms of what you develop, in terms of the environment that you're coming into, whether you're looking at something that's like in a grove setting or an actual stronghold in a facility, in a building that they're coming into. I think that what's really interesting when you come into this is what those layer actions are going to look like specifically, because now you have this godly power kind of built up behind it to some extent for these warlocks to be able to utilize it. It may reflect some of what we talked about in our cleric video specifically, but you're going to see a different type of magic and power be emulated here that you may not see in other strongholds.
I think probably one of the neatest things for me, if you're approaching that, because for one, you can basically build this up as a Sith style stronghold, right? You have the Warlock, who is the number one up top, who is, the Dark Lord or whatever, or the Light Lord, doesn't matter. But you have the Warlock that's up top, and then you have the trickling people down beneath them, kind of in the same way as a church. But I just think of the Sith because I know that they have all of their knights and other ranks of people who are following what this would be considered the patron, and they have to basically protect this stronghold because they're being called to the same task. And if the patron is endorsing the Warlock that is in charge, then everybody has to listen to that Warlock. And I think that that's very interesting. But the really cool thing when we're talking about layer actions is many times the patron is actually calling upon someone who is actually in one of the monstrous manuals. So if you're talking about a Pact of the Fiend, there are dozens of fiends, high level, demon lords and devil princes of hell and things like that are actually in the monstrous manual, and you can look at their lair actions. Now, I'm not saying that you pull directly from those, but you could give versions of that, or you could give lesser versions of that, because they have their patron's blessing when they're in their stronghold. So you can go look at Orcus and go, okay, so his patron is Orcus. let me go look at Orcus's lair actions, and then I can take versions of those or lesser versions of those or whatever and apply those to the Warlock in his own stronghold, because that's what he's pulling from. He's basically just an extension of what Orcus does. But we can do the same thing for Archfey. We can do the same thing for like ancient dragons that could potentially become patrons. Any number of those work really, really well to just basically pick up those lair actions and plop them right in on top of where your NPC is, and your PC eventually whenever they have their own stronghold.
I think the interesting piece too that comes into play with it, because the entities that the Warlock is paying homage to are so much more real than what you may see with other particular classes when they're paying homage to something, that you may actually see those entities come in or arrive or come in as like a BBEG after you defeat the Warlock, and essentially lay some sort of claim or start another adventure or even fight you right then and there because you destroyed the person that was doing all this work for them.
You're right.
Which could be very interesting, and seeing that be like the next level up or the next step up. Or if you have a Warlock in your party, it may be awarding them if they follow the same patronage. I don't know. It's very just interesting story-wise in terms of what can occur, because a lot of times the Warlock is looking at an entity that's very real, and you can bring them in after the defeat of that and then start a whole nother round.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really neat option. Again, it depends on the patron and what their relationship is like and that type of thing. Cthulhu is not going to pop in at the end of the fight to like support, or even during the fight to support directly. But if you have maybe a lesser Archfey or something like that, they might be more tied to their Warlock than some of the other ones might be. It may be a process where it's like they're actually there to one degree or another. And then you have, and that allows you, I think, to deal with more high level type approaches to defeating an NPC Warlock. Like, I wouldn't do this with a level 10 Warlock. I might consider doing it with like a level 20.
Yeah. I don't know. Any other thoughts on this, John?
No, I again, they're super versatile. There's a ton of options available for the way that you approach a Warlock Stronghold, and because you get to basically build an extra NPC as a patron, I think that you have a ton of options for NPC Warlocks as quest givers. You have a ton of options for the expectations and the questing of a PC once they obtain their stronghold, or the way in which they obtain their stronghold. And when you're talking about antagonist Warlocks, again, I think the lair action options and the actual conquering of that stronghold is probably going to be one of the most fun options that you can come up with, just because of the versatility of the class.
All right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us here again on Dungeon Brew. Make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button, leave us a comment. Let us know what you would like to see us do a series on, and we will see you all next week.
Dungeon Brew.